Got it.
And cacti.
and cactuses. And we're live. Guys, it is Monday, the 20th day of October, the year of our Lord 2025. And folks, I got a really important announcement to make. It is not a dog shirt day. The estimable Melissa has given both Holly and me a gift, and I want to share it with you. Born to dilly dally, forced to fight fascism. It wasn't our choice, guys. They brought the fight to us. We're just bringing it back to them. I found myself on Saturday before I went to the screening of Ben Between Africa and No, the Ben is not me. Um, uh, and which we're going to spend the rest of the hour talking about. But before I went to the screening of that film, I went to the No Kings protest and found myself walking behind two dinosaurs. And you can see the picture of it, the two dinosaur backs with Pennsylvania Avenue, and they're kind of bouncing along. And I'm walking, and I have to say, I experienced no cognitive dissonance walking behind the dinosaurs. It didn't seem strange. What am I doing here with two T-Rexes, brightly colored, as T-Rexes probably weren't, cheerful,
I don't
and
know.
sauntering down Pennsylvania Avenue? I didn't ask the question, do I have a political message in common with the dinosaurs? What are the dinosaurs saying except silliness in the face of nastiness? And I am so freaking here for that. Silliness in the face of nastiness. And so I walked down Pennsylvania Avenue with the in back of the two dinosaurs. We didn't say a word. I didn't greet them. They didn't greet me, but I took a picture of their butts. And you can find that on Saturday's Dog Shirt Daily. And then, folks, I took some other pictures, and I may have done some scouting, reconnaissance for a projection operation directed at Mr. Kash Patel and the Hoover Building. I may have done it. I'm not going to confirm or deny that. And then I went home, and I was going to be a good friend. And I was going to be a good friend, and Holly had a book event, and I was kind of dimly aware that there was going to be a screening of a film, and I did not pay it any attention. I bought a ticket to the event to be a good friend, to support Holly, and I was tired, and I was not really in the mood to go to an event. I don't like going to events on weekends because, like, my whole frickin' week is events. And I like to spend my weekend going to the cabin and doing work and maybe going to Solid Core with Holly. And, I wasn't in the headspace for an event. And I arrive at this event in a pop-up movie theater, which is kind of awesome, by the
He's
way.
awesome. It turned out to be perfect.
If you live in the DC area, what's it called?
Angelica.
Angelica. It's like at Union Market, down in the old, completely unwalkable part of Washington. That used to be somewhere you did not go, and now it is just hopping and wonderful, and super good restaurants, and really diverse and interesting. And I go to this event, and I walk in, and the first thing I realize is that I may be the only non-missionary kid there.
Nope.
This is like, there are a few of Holly's friends who are like me, like pressed against a wall, and like, this is a missionary kid culture. And these are the people that Holly's book is about. And I, you know, very feeling a little out of place. And then there's the screening of this movie, and I was completely blown away by it. Um, and um, and so in the spirit of this show, as a kind of living diary of my and my co-hosts' life and experiences and conversations, and we try to bring people that we're having interesting conversations with to you guys, the Greek chorus in the immediate sense, and the larger audience in the longer term sense. I just told Holly, bring that woman on the show Monday morning because we want to talk to her. And that is why Ari Ali is looking at you, befuddled by what choices in her life she might have made to be doing this at 8 in the morning. But, folks, we're going to get right into it because I think you don't really actually want to spend more time this morning than you have to hearing from me. So I will just say that the sun is shining. It was rainy last night, but the sun is shining now. The birds are chirping. It's going to be a great fucking day. It's going to be a great fucking week. And cactuses,
You're watching Dog Shirt TV, a forking revolution in morning television.
you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a
Impressive, huh,
goddamn
Ari?
revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that sometimes I unexpectedly get blown away by a movie over the weekend, and that's going to be what the show's going to be about on Monday morning. And another one of the revolutionary features, there are a bunch of them, is that sometimes it is not a dog shirt day, it is a mouse day, and the mouse was born to dilly dally, but she's been forced to fight fascism, and so she's walking behind two
I think it's male.
dinosaurs.
I think the mouse is male. I'm just saying.
I don't know. Well, oh, I guess that's right. He's kind of dressed as a
Men
courtier.
back then were kind of effeminate.
Yeah, there was a whole thing. Um, and so we're going to walk behind two dinosaurs and not feel like we have to ask, what do I have politically in common with these dinosaurs? All of which is a long winded way of saying that we are not allowed to have fun anymore. But we are allowed to have Ari Ali, director of Ben, not me, Between Africa, and Ari, I don't need to introduce you to Holly, who introduced you to me, but I do need to introduce you to our other co-host, Mike Feinberg, who is, among other things, a genuine expert on film. Um, he is many other things, but he's a genuine student of the art of film.
He's like
So,
25 other things,
and
but
25 other things. We
None of
are,
which have any utility in real life whatsoever.
well, there was that whole FBI counterintelligence thing. So,
Yeah.
Ari, let's start. I'm going to show to orient people the trailer of your film. But let's, while I'm setting it up, introduce yourself a little bit. Who the heck are you, and how did you come to be making a film about your uncle's death in Kenya?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on here. This is awesome. It is early in the morning, so I am just waking up. I have a great, strong cup of coffee. Um, but Ben, I did notice that you bought your ticket pretty early on, so you are a really good friend. I noticed your name pop up on the Eventbrite ticket, and I was like, oh, who's this Ben guy? So
I do what Holly tells me. Holly said we need people to come to this. I went and bought a ticket.
you were, yeah, great friend. I saw that name pop
I
up.
do some free labor for Ben
Yeah,
so he kind of owes me a
has
little
to.
bit.
He has to. Yeah. So it was actually, you're not the only non-MK in the audience. I'm also not an MK, missionary kid. And I think there was like
But you're an M Grand K.
I'm an M Grand K, exactly. That's the first, I'm going to start using that term because, um, but yeah, so I started making this film back in 2017. I went to my cousin's wedding, and the night before the wedding, someone mentioned that my late Uncle Ben had sent out a final letter a few days before he passed. And he died in 1975 in Kenya as a Peace Corps volunteer. And growing up, my mom really didn't talk about him, and she didn't talk a lot about growing up a missionary kid. And so I was curious about who this guy was, how did he die, and then why didn't we talk about it? And that started out a 7-year journey to find this letter. And then along the way, one of the first things that happens that you see in the movie is that I discover a bunch of boxes in a family's attic, a family member's attic. And as I'm unpacking those boxes, I go on a journey where I meet people who grew up alongside Ben and my mom, and they tell me what it was like to grow up missionary kids in Ethiopia. And so I kind of look into Ethiopian history of that era, what happened with Haile Selassie, and then also the work that my grandparents were doing, and how all of that affected the kids. And the center core of the film is mostly my mom and my relationship. As I discover things, wanting to hear from her what her childhood was like. And although we're in the film wondering if I'll ever find the letter, I think we're also wondering if I'll ever get a chance to talk to my mom directly about how all of this affected her. So that's the setup for the trailer, and I think that does give the trailer a little bit more context.
And yeah, and so we're gonna play the trailer momentarily, but before we do, just who are you in relation to film? Are you a filmmaker by background? Is this like what's your history with filmmaking that you were in a position to say, hey, I found this box of letters, think I'll make a film about it?
That's a good question, and Holly kind of pointed me out about that on Saturday night. I just started talking to the audience, and Holly was like, hold on a second, who are you? Who are you? Like, so I do kind of dive in without remembering that there's a whole backstory to how I came about to make this film, which is I am a filmmaker. I did go to film school, and I've been making films for the last 15 to 20 years, but this is my first feature-length project where I'm the director and the producer. I've spent the last 20 years helping other people make their films, and then I also work in the media industry as a producer. But this is my first debut directorial feature-length. Produced it, raised money for it, passion project, and it's a deeply personal film. So for me, it was like when the idea for this project came about, I like just started filming. Like I didn't even know where this film was going to go or what it was totally going to be about. But when I found out about the boxes in the attic, I took a camera with me, and that kind of just launched the entire experience.
All right. With that, here is the trailer.
Dear Mommy, dear parents,
Dear folks,
Dear Ben, I really want to know what happened to you. This mysterious uncle I know so little about.
he was a real knowledge seeker.
He was very into storytelling.
His mind was just always going.
I think he would be fascinated by you.
Do you know the specifics around how Ben died?
That's always been kind of a mystery.
Is there a connection between your death, the final letter you wrote, and this feeling of being fractured as a family? My mom and her siblings grew up in Ethiopia.
There was a lot of opposition towards missionaries on the part of the Orthodox Church, But the emperor, he knew what they could do.
All the missionaries said, we just send our kids off to boarding school. And so there we were just abandoned.
At an early age, when you're sent away like that, it affects you the rest of your life.
When you guys came to America, both you and Ben immediately wanted to go back.
Yeah, we were like fish out of water.
Please write soon. I'm homesick for Ethiopia.
He missed it. He wanted to go back to Ethiopia. So much of who he was from there.
So the late 1960s and early 70s was really a time of student revolution. But by the time Ben returns, he's now seen as someone who's no longer welcomed.
Times don't change for you. You have to walk with the times. So he didn't do that.
Known as Ben to his friends.
We knew you between Africa.
My dear Ben, you were real. You are family. When I started this search, I hadn't considered the loss I might feel.
Where the search for the truth is greater than the fear. You're going to bring healing to that whole system. And that's what you're doing.
Remembering is so important. I'm so glad you came.
I'm gonna start crying again.
All right. This gives us a heck of a text to start with. Um, so first of all, for those who have read Holly's book, which is a lot of you, considering that
You don't have any choice.
well, it was the book on our it's the book of the month on our book club. Uh, so you will immediately notice that a bunch of the themes that Holly writes about, the abusive nature of the boarding schools, the sense of being fish out of water when you come back to the United States, just a whole lot of themes that are whole chapters in Holly's book are really important themes of even the trailer here. How did you guys meet and realize that you were working on the same subject from in different media and one in this macrocosmic way of trying to sort of think about the whole phenomenon, and one in this uh, deeply microcosmic way of looking at, her own family?
Yeah, so I heard about Ari's film, I think almost simultaneously from my editor, who is herself a missionary kid, although she was very young. I wouldn't say it's a formative, it was like that as formative as for others, but and more importantly, she is from this Mennonite community, which that is one difference between the two subjects, is there is some difference there. I heard about it from her, but then also pretty simultaneously, I saw something about it on one of the many, MK Facebook pages or forums online. And so I just went, I think I bought a ticket to one of your other DC events that I ended up not going to. Sorry about that. But I went online and bought a ticket, and there was like a place to comment or something. And so I just said like, hey, I'm the author of this book. And then also, and my editor said something like, "Oh, you guys should do something together." So yeah, we got in touch, and then uh, we decided pretty quickly after that to try to do something jointly together, and linked up with the MK Safety Net, the advocacy group. Um, that also was a huge resource for me in my research. Um, so yeah, we put this event together, and yeah, it turned out beautifully. We didn't really know like, well, how big a theater should we get? How many, can we fill up this theater? I don't know. And it ended up being just an incredibly beautiful event. The MK Safety Net, that was the centerpiece of a weekend retreat that they sort of put together. And people came from all over the place, all over the country and Canada, actually, for this. So it was pretty amazing. I don't know if that was the first time you heard about my book, is when I contacted you, or if you had heard about it at all.
I will say that a lot of people I talked to on Saturday night had like driven like 6+ hours to be there, and some of them had arrived right as the film was starting. And so that was really amazing to meet people who were willing to drive so many hours or fly. Someone drove all the way down from upstate New York to see the film, and I think be in community with other former missionary kids. So it was really moving. Like, like Holly said, we put a lot of time and effort and stress getting this screening going, because we had to, invest in the theater and pay for it and buy tickets for, me to be out here and all this stuff. And so it was an investment. But then seeing people also equally invest to be there, and how meaningful it was for them to be there, like that made it all worthwhile. It made it like, this is why we do these things and why we come into, community together, because it really means a lot to everyone.
So, Ari, did you know anything about Holly's book before she reached out and uh, said, "Hey, we're working on the same thing"?
So this is what's been interesting about the entire process for me, is I kind of threw myself into this world, but I'm from a very different world. So although my mom was a missionary kid and my grandparents were Mennonite, I was raised very much so outside of the entire missionary world and the entire Mennonite community. So my sister and I were talking yesterday about how all like Mennonites and the MK world feels familiar to us, but it's because it was in the air and it was in the water, but it's not how we were raised. And so I keep having these moments where I'm like, maybe I didn't do enough research. So like, no, like a lot of things were surprises to me. So when Holly's book was recommended, one of my first thoughts was like, wow, this would have really changed and have influenced me if I had read it while making the film. I don't think
It wasn't out for one thing, so.
it wasn't out, but like just the awareness, just like realizing that there's other people having parallel paths to my own. Like there's other people exploring topics I'm interested in. And I think this whole experience has really opened up my eyes to like, when you're interested in something and working on something, there's probably someone else out there tapped into the same zeitgeist, and that these collaborations become very powerful when you have similar interests. And so, no, I didn't know about Holly's book, but when her publisher put me in touch, it felt like such an obvious collaboration. And, you know, in all transparency, when I came to DC just a couple days ago, I was on their flight out here, I was like, what am I going to do with this film in 2026? Like, 2025 has been all about traveling across the country and showing the film to a very particular community, but I didn't really quite focus on MKs who are my generation, which Holly is. And then after the screening on Saturday night, I'm very clear on what 2026 needs to be. It needs to be reaching out to the MKs who are contemporary MKs, like 50s and younger, who have had this experience and are getting together. And this could be a very good conversation starter. This film could be utilized in that way.
Very much so.
Well, so people in the chat, which we call the Greek chorus, are already asking about how they can see the film. I will let Ari answer that as a general matter for those who want to attend a screening that may be scheduled. However, I will say that just before we went live, I asked Ari if she wanted to do a virtual screening on as part of Dogshirt TV's book club. We can do that at any time of convenience, and she has said, let's do it. So we will schedule something for obviously closed for paid subscribers to the site, because I don't want to make her at least without her consent, I don't want to make it generally available to, anybody who wants to sign on to YouTube. But for people who want to come to one of these things, she and I will work out a time to do a screening and a more detailed conversation. And so, Ari, how else can people see the film?
Yeah, so I'm on the chat now. Yeah, so I have 2 more screenings left this year. I have a San Diego screening that I'm very excited about because the focus is completely different. In the San Diego screening, I'm focusing on the documentary and photography community in the area. And we rented out this really beautiful auditorium at the Museum of Photographic Arts in Balboa Park. And anyone that knows San Diego knows what a gorgeous location this is. And I'm teaming up with another filmmaker who has a film that's very similar to mine, where she's trying to figure out her mom's story. Her mom passed away when she was only 18 months. It's called A Photographic Memory, and it's such a beautiful film. So we're pairing up, we're doing a double feature, and we're focusing our attention in getting the San Diego photography community. So it's going to be a really beautiful screening. We have 200 seats to sell, so there will be plenty of seats for everyone. And at the end of the year, there'll be another screening, which is on Vimeo. And so what we'll do is, if you go to the Eventbrite link, you can buy any ticket. It doesn't really matter. When you buy the ticket on December 13th, I'll send you a link to Vimeo and a password. And then you have 2 weeks to watch the film. And my goal with this is, when I was doing screenings across the country and I had multiple screenings lined up in one town back to back, during the first screening, someone would come by themselves. And then they would show up to the second screening, but they would have their mom with them, or they would have like a family member. And then by the third screening, I would have an entire row that was like a whole family. And so I feel like this is one of those films that people want to bring family members to. So what I'm hoping is that if I have a screening over the holidays, maybe someone will watch it once on their own, and then they'll like, hey, mom, you should come over, or whoever come over, and they'll watch it again together. So I want people to watch this film with their family members or people who they want to have conversations with, because it's a really beautiful conversation starter. So December 13th through the 31st, the film will be available through Vimeo. And it's just a matter of buying the ticket, and then December 13th, you get a link.
Yeah. I
I
think
have.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Holly.
no, I was just gonna say I obviously, it's especially pertinent to missionary families and MKs, but really, I mean, there's just something about families that makes going in certain emotional places so fraught, and the sort of divides that build up over time.
Yeah,
And
it's about a lot more
yeah,
than.
it's
It's also about family secrets.
yeah.
It's about closed communities and their blinders. It's about um, the uh, the good and bad of insular communities in dialogue with larger societies. It's about a lot of things that are not limited to missionary kids by any
I think the
means.
thing I'm hearing from a lot of people, no matter what their backgrounds is that intergenerational healing that we all want. So it's like having the hard conversations either, I mean, I had someone come up to me after the screening on Saturday night and was like, I need to have the conversation with my daughter that you had with your mom. So I think it's also about like family members getting together and talking about things and the healing going in both directions. And I think a topic for me that I hadn't even thought about before working on this film was like unresolved grief. Like this whole idea that like we have unprocessed grief and that it gets passed down from generation to generation. So something could have happened not in your own life, but you've inherited it. And may make you feel, in the film I talk about how it felt like something was fractured in my family, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly it was. And so I think a lot of us walk around with this feeling like there's something that needs to be healed, but how do you figure out what it is? Sometimes you don't even know what it could be, you just feel it. And so I think this is about kind of those more murky areas of life where like it's about a feeling and how do you address a feeling and how do you talk about a feeling? And then someone will tell you what they may think it is, and all of a sudden, like, oh, there's a deeper awareness about like, okay, there are legs to this feeling I have when I walk into a room with my family. And so I think the film addresses something that I think is hard to put your finger on most of the time.
One thing I hadn't asked you yet has this like changed your dynamic like in the post film? I mean, that's the impression I get from watching the film, but of course real life is goes on and is much more complex. So I was wondering if what the sort of enduring change in your family dynamics has been.
Yeah, I would have answered this very differently if you asked me at Friday, but this weekend, my mom and my uncle, her younger brother, spent the weekend together, and he drove down from northern Pennsylvania to Georgia to spend the weekend with her, and he didn't do that before this film. And so I think this film is not just about me and my mom's relationship, but I think it had like a ripple effect on the other relationships in the family. And I think I just put all of our business out there. And I think it kind of made uh, my family wake up a little bit to like how much the limited time we have left with each other, especially my mom's generation, and maybe making amends or maybe, spending more time together. And also my cousin and I have a cousin who there's 10 years between us and we never really had that much in common. But since actually there's two cousins who I've become a lot closer with through the process of making this film. So this film really did change the dynamic of my family. It's not just what you see on camera, but at the same time, it doesn't make other conversations easier to have. Just because we had this one hard
Yeah, yeah.
conversation, there are other things we need to talk about, and it hasn't made it easier. But at least I know there's proof that we can. Like, when the time is right, maybe.
I want to ask you, since you mentioned the San Diego photography community, I want to ask you about some cinematographic aspects of the film. One of the things that I really noticed as I was watching it is how many of the shots in it are through windows or through doors, both exterior doors into rooms, but also within a house through some kind of a portal into another room, including a whole lot of shots of yourself. Um, And I'm interested in I took that as a kind of visual metaphor for constantly trying to see into things that are sort of right there but separated by some kind of a barrier. Uh, I assume the choice was self-conscious, not subconscious. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, thank you. You said all that very well. And it's one of those things where it's very subtle. And so my editor and I, we were just a two-person filmmaking team. So I shot most of the interviews. I shot alone for 5 years. And I just went around and collected interviews with everyone who would talk to me from the community for 5 years. And then I brought my editor on um, like 2 years in, like sorry, 2 years before it was done. So 5 years in, I brought him in, and then we worked together for 2 years, and we did an edit of the film where we used all the footage that I shot. And so this film took me 7 years to make. And so over the course of 7 years, the footage we had me in multiple different locations. And I get haircuts all the time. I grow my hair out all the time. Like I look very different from
Yeah,
year to year.
you change a lot in the different shots of the film.
Yeah, and so one of the things we wanted to do is it felt like the film was too fragmented. Like it took part in too many places. And so what we did is we sat down, and once we had an edit of the film, we said like, we can do whatever we want. It's just you and me. There's no investors. There's no one waiting for us to finish this film. Like, let's really put a lot of like artistry into this. And we both have backgrounds as photographers and experimental filmmakers, so we wanted to bring those elements in and tell a story that was a little bit more artistic. And we really wanted to bring in a lot more like emotion than just like, here are the facts of what happened. And so we really leaned into our backgrounds. And we were very influenced by this film called Wood and Water that's made by a German filmmaker. And his cinematography just really, really moved us. And so we kind of used that film as an inspiration. And what we wanted to do is set up shots that pointed to something being in the environment that you can't see, but it's there. So we did a lot of shooting of dust and particles in the air because it's something that exists in the
And
space.
particles on and contour of photographs.
Yeah.
A bunch of images of the texture of the photographic paper that things are printed on.
Yeah, so the film is largely based on the archives, the family archives that were found in the attic. And one of the things that really struck me is how beautiful this material is. It's all from the mid-century, so it has a particular color and feel and texture that's very different than how we print things today, our materials today. And we really wanted to capture that because we thought this is what really sets this film apart. And really early on in the filmmaking, someone said to me, you might be one of the last people to find letters in an attic because we live in a digital era now. And so we really wanted to harness that. And we had the privilege of working with a 6K, really beautiful cinema camera. And we reshot so many things I had shot on my own, but we reshot it in this really high resolution way in order to capture those textures and those colors. And so basically we had the opportunity to slow down and be very intentional about how we shot things. And we really wanted to capture that feeling of you're in a space. There's things in that space with you that you can't quite see until you put a light on it. So the dust particles in the projector. There's one point where I'm looking at slides and you see a reflection of it from the sun on the wall.
Yep.
Also, I worked with a really talented sound designer, and she was really touched by these subtleties, these visual subtleties. And she went in and she actually assigned a sound to each one of them. So whenever I'm talking about Ben and there's light in the room, she added a sound to that light. And then the composer I worked with is an Emmy award-winning composer that took the film on for like a huge discount because he was so moved by the project. And he went in and he created a very particular music tone for Ben. So whenever Ben comes up, there's like music that comes on that's specific to Ben. And then whenever my mom comes up, there's music that's for her only. And so we have all these layers in the film that I think people are so moved by the film, not just because of the subject matter, but there's layers of visual and auditory cues there too to keep you like kind of in line with what's happening.
No, it's an
I also
incredibly.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Holly.
I also loved the music, the Ethiopian sort of influence on the music. Like that's something that I don't know, the composer wrote that music or pulled from Ethiopian music.
So you'll really like this, Holly. Throughout the making of this film, I was always showing my mom cuts. And we use a lot of placeholder music, like we use a lot of stock music for the majority of making the film. And my mom kept saying like, "Oh, it's coming along really nicely, but you don't have the music quite right just yet." So she kept saying the music's not right, the music's not right. And so I did a lot of research into Ethiopian music of that era, and I worked with, I also started talking to a Boston-based Ethiopian musician, D.A. McConan, and listening to his music and being inspired by it. And so when I started working with my composer, I was like sending him all of this music that I had been inspired by from the 1970s Ethiopian music, very nostalgic music for those of us who grew up in that era. And I didn't grow up in that era, but grew up listening to it. And so my composer took those songs, hired musicians, and then recreated music based on the instruments and the style of music of that era. And then for a few parts, when I go back to Ethiopia in the film, D.A. McConan let us license some of his music because it's contemporary Ethiopian, it's a little bit more jazz and a little bit more like fun, upbeat stuff. But when I finally showed the final piece to my mom, one of the most important moments to me is she turned to me and she's like, "You nailed the music." And so it's, in a weird way, she was my music supervisor. She like, and it's her life, it's her story. It was the era she grew up in. The music is very nostalgic to her, so getting that right was really important to me.
Yeah, I think, documentary film is, for those who've never dabbled in this space, it's an exceptionally hard medium, and one thing that often goes by the wayside, even in really good documentaries, is just the quality of the detailing, things that in other types of film you really think hard about, like sound design and what's the visual touch going to be. And this is beautifully done detail by detail, which I really just noticed sitting there, that it's a powerful story, and told it's told powerfully, and it's shown powerfully in, despite the fact actually that you don't have that much archival, you don't have that much, you have one video clip of Ben. I think there are lots of photographs of him, but only one where he moves, right? And it's only for a second. You have very little contemporary footage that's not stock. A lot of it is still images. A lot of it is retrospective interviews, and putting that together and making that work is just like, I don't work in film media. I work in, but I do tell stories, right? In written form, and that's just a super, super hard thing to do. And so congratulations just on the artistry components of it.
Now that you mention it, I didn't have, I mean, I guess I realized that you only had, because you say it in the film, that you only have this brief moving film of Ben, but watching the film, that's not this, you feel like you do. I think it's the juxtaposition of all the photographs with his words, but it has like a embodiment to it. So you feel like he has come alive, even though he's not on a film moving around.
So I have never made a movie. How much do you have to raise to make a film like this? I mean, you have
how do you do that? Like, how did you fund that?
Like where does the talk us through the process of, okay, you're a professional, so you don't have to hire yourself, and you're doing all the filming yourself. Is it a $10,000 project, a $25,000 project, a $500,000 project? How do you fund it, and who do you go to do something like this?
Yeah, I will say that I don't think being a filmmaker at my level is a very sustainable like career. Like I'm lucky because I live way below my means. Like I'm a very frugal person so that I can make films. Um, raising money can take a decade. Like raising enough money to make a film like this can take a decade. And I went into this very like like I didn't know what I was getting myself into, which I think actually was really beautiful and important. Like I think if I had known what this would have taken to pull off, like the money, the time, the sacrifices it would have taken to pull off, like I it would have been a really hard decision to say yes, fully I want to do this. But because I didn't know what I was getting myself into, I kind of just did it. But so for me, a lot of filmmakers spend a ton of time applying to grants and trying to fundraise, like grassroots fundraise to their network. And I did that a little bit, and I raised 15K through my community in like a 2-week fundraiser. But this film cost a little bit over 200K to make. And so the 15K didn't, it was just basically the 15K I raised in that entire fundraiser. The best part that came out of it was being able to get the word out about the film before we even started editing. And so it kind of helped me build momentum around interest for the film before we even started editing. But the way that I made this film is that I did 90% of the work until the very end. So it was more my free labor, and which you can't survive that way. Like I cannot make another film that way. Like I will have no retirement savings if I do that. And so it's been a huge investment for me, but I see it as an investment in proving that I can tell a story and hopefully opening the door up for myself to make more films that are funded by other people. But the brilliant part about it not being funded by other people is I didn't have anyone who was invested in this other than myself. So there were a lot of turning points where I had to make very hard decisions. And I'm really glad that I didn't have to ask someone else for like, well, you're the big investor in this film. Like, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
And so it gave my editor and I a lot of freedom. And where the cost really came in. So I did a lot of things where like at the time I worked for a company that would send me to the East Coast a lot for work. And so I would tie in a weekend, and then I would spend the weekend running around shooting, doing interviews. And so the company would pay for my ticket, and then I would just tag on a weekend for filming. The most expensive element of this film was the editor. And so I hired an editor for 2 years, and he didn't do any other work during those 2 years. So I basically paid his entire income for 2 years in order to edit the film. But you kind of it needs to be something that you're in a cave editing every day, and it's your entire, it's your entire life in order for it to get done. I know a lot of other filmmakers' films will stay in editing for 5 to 10 years because they're constantly trying to fundraise. So he came in at a really, really he came in at more than 50% less than he normally makes in order to work on the film. And what I would do is I would work, and then a portion of my paycheck would go to pay him. And so some months I would be like, I can only afford you for 20 days this month. And so this was really like a labor of love and like a labor of like blind hope and belief, because you're like, I don't know if this is going to work out. And there were several months where I was like, I don't know how this film's ever going to get done. And then another major expense was bringing on the composer, and that was like a huge investment. I could have bought a new car for what I paid for the composer, but it felt to me like I'll keep driving my 15-year-old car because I think the music for this film has to be spot on. And so there are a lot of sacrifices that were made, but I do think one thing I always tell people is every single person that worked on this film was completely passionate about it. And I think it really comes through in the end product. And it makes me not ever want to work on a project where that's not the case, because like everyone had to really believe in the project to see it through. And everyone took a huge pay cut, everyone dedicated hours. And it is a passion.
Sounds like lawfare.
Yeah.
That's
no,
been,
I mean, I'm
publication.
sort of joking in the sense that we are now at the position that in the position that we, raise enough money to actually pay people salaries. And but the amount of free labor that has gone into lawfare over the years, from which a lot of people did a huge amount of work over sustained periods of time with no expectation of ever getting compensated that's the core of the site, for, I don't know, 12 or 13 of the 15 years of its existence.
Yeah. I mean, and these are the things that keep us happy and alive. So it's worth it in the end,
Yeah, it's so true. That's like the writing is the same way. Like, no, you don't, you don't write a book or even start writing a book thinking like it's gonna make you money. Like that's not why people write. And most authors don't make any money really. I'll be lucky to sort of break even in terms of like my expenses anyway. And if you added up the number of hours and
Yeah.
like paid me an hourly
Yeah.
rate, I would never break even, right?
No.
But
I've written 8 books, I think, and I have never made more money on a book than I could have made with the comparable hours at a minimum wage
not even
job.
close. Not even close. Yeah.
And
Here's what I'll say, I think we're the lucky ones because I think people who are working purely on their 9 to 5 paycheck, if that's all you do, you're missing this entire other existence, this creative existence. And so
you
I
might
always,
call it a purpose-driven life.
you might.
Thank you, Rick Warren. Yeah, you're becoming such an evangelical, Ben. I've trained you really well. So he's practically evangelical now. So Ari, how do you live? You do have a day job? Like
Yeah,
how you do a bunch of other work. I presume you
Yeah.
get like filmmaking work, you get paid for that. But like how does a filmmaker sort of eat?
Yeah, so all of these screenings that I'm doing right now, they're kind of just paying for themselves. Like if I make $8, I'll be like, we made a profit, So the screenings basically pay for themselves. I've had some really amazing people come through and just send me like a couple $100 to be like, please keep going. Like this film's important. Like if this helps, great. And then I always put that money back into like the future screening, maybe getting a nicer, like the theater we got was really nice.
Really nice.
I think it makes a huge difference. So if I get any amount of money over just covering the cost, the next screening I'll punch a little bit higher and try to get an even nicer venue type thing. But I'm a freelance filmmaker, so I was part of a company for a while, but I went freelance in order so I can really focus on the film and getting it out there. And so I'm a producer, creative director, so I will work on commercials and stuff like that, and I do a couple of those a year. And then I have been getting paid to come on and talk for things like this. Like I have been offered money to do different types of speaking, keynote presentations on the process of making the film, and that has helped. But like I'm not in an era of my life where I'm like stacking cash away for retirement or anything like that. And I'm assuming that will come later, but I am getting older, so I should probably take it more seriously. But yeah, no, I do work in the industry and that has helped too. So I met my editor through a commercial job that I did. And I know a lot of the stuff I do on how I was able to make the film because I am in the industry and I have those skills. And there's a leaf blower that just showed up. I don't know if you guys can hear it.
Part of that's part of the work here. So
yeah, the background noise, which sometimes involves barking dogs, babies, it's just part of the show. We as are the tech glitches. We don't even apologize for them.
And we don't have an editor. Like we don't edit the this is not a film. So Ari and I she filmed a conversation between us that she's gonna do her magic on and put up. So that'll be coming later. But my dog, as Ben knows my dog, so he's not going to be surprised to hear that Lilo did his best to sabotage that filming. So
excellent. Well, when we do the virtual screening, we will have I will figure out a way for people to make contributions. Not sure yet technically how we'll do that, but we'll figure out a way to do it. All right, so we have about 11 minutes left. Folks, if you want to get in, this is your chance to ask your own questions. Feel free to jump in or to pose questions in the chat. I am particularly interested in one line in the movie, which I did not remember verbatim, but I will just describe to you, which is that at one point, sort of about 2/3, 3/4 of the way in, you sort of say something like, I thought this was going to be about Ben's death or an investigation, and I realized that the real issue here is the boarding schools. And I was really shocked by that line, that there's this, you go in with kind of a sense that there's a missing story in your uncle's death, and you come away really alarmed by the boarding school culture, which is also a big feature of Holly's book. And so I want to ask you, first of all, how you came to that realization. And then I want to talk to Holly a little bit about the differences between the evangelical culture and its boarding schools and the Mennonite culture and its boarding schools. But like, how did the subject change to be, whoa, the real story here is the boarding schools?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I've never been asked that before, so I like it. Yeah, so when I was going out and interviewing people, my questions were like logistical and historical. Like, when did this happen? When did that happen? Like, how did it feel to be like a Mennonite missionary living in Ethiopia, and how did people react to you? But in the conversation, once we warmed up and we were talking for a while, it would always steer towards boarding school. So the parents, the missionary parents I would talk to, they were in they're in their 80s and 90s, and they were reflecting on their lives. And, they would say things to me like, oh yes, well, boarding school. And then they would go into that, and talk about it. And then when I was talking to my mom and Ben's peers, the conversation would always veer back towards boarding school and like what that was like for them. And so I went in with one particular agenda, but the community kept telling me, no, this is the story we want to talk about. And then with my family, I think the moment that you're talking about hit me really hard, because I read all of my family's letters. So my family was constantly sending letters back and forth to each other. So oftentimes, and my grandmother saved everything. So oftentimes I had everyone's perspective on the same thing. And so when Ben died, I had my mom's letters to her parents, and I had their parents, their letters to her. And when I put it all together, I realized there was this moment where I realized when Ben died, not a single member of my family was together. They were all living their own lives, very separate from each other. And my mom was in her early 20s, and her brothers were even younger. And so I realized like this family separation element started out really young. And when Ben died, like it was really a huge moment of shining a light on how separate they were. They all had to take the news alone. They all had to process it alone. And they all had to just kind of like, quote unquote, get over it alone, because there was nobody around to process it. And I mean, honestly, like one of the most beautiful things I realized in that moment too is how the Mennonite missionary community swooped in to be with my mom and her siblings, because her parents were still in Ethiopia and she was in the States. So I think it was in the interviews, people coming to me over and over again, wanting to talk about the boarding school experience, that made me realize this is where the story is. And this is what the true moment of conflict is the family separation. And then finding those letters and realizing that my mom at 23 years old had to process her brother's passing all on her own. So that's kind of where that moment came from.
So Holly, I think of Mennonites as English-speaking, quasi old order Amish with.
They're not Amish, as they.
I know. That's why I said quasi, but they're kind of connected. They're sort of old Anabaptists. They're gentler than evangelicals.
No, culturally,
Sorry?
they're very different. So I wouldn't say there's, on the boarding school issue, the Mennonite versus just evangelical. There's not really it's more of a generational divide. Like the real abuse and harshness did dissipate over time. That's not what I experienced. What I experienced was just the separation, the sort of institutionalized, you can't even call it parenting, which when you're a young child is really, really inadequate. I think as you get, into high school, a boarding school setting can be, a fun and great thing depending on the person. So there was a definite generational evolution, and the older MKs that I've talked to and that Ari features in the film really endured a lot of really harsh abusive treatment. And that's not something that that was not part of we had some onerous punishments, but we weren't beaten or anything like that.
And that wouldn't be and whatever the gaps between Mennonites and the evangelicals, that's
No, I don't
the
think
boarding
that's a
school culture.
theological thing. I interviewed a few Mennonite. By the time my parents were missionaries, the Mennonites had sort of, they hadn't vanished from the scene, but they had certainly receded from the scene. They were a lot more, I would say, culturally humble. And so therefore the allowances, and even Ben in his letters talking about his sort of qualms with the missionary enterprise, like an evangelical MK would never probably even have the awareness to say that, and certainly would never say it out loud at the age that he did to their parents. Like that would not. So the sort of cultural humility and respect for the culture, I think was, I found to be greater in the Mennonite community. And so therefore it's not surprising that over time, they probably handed over control of various enterprises to national leaders and organizations earlier. The evangelicals are still there. There's been some of that in the evangelical mindset. Evangelical culture is incredibly arrogant. I mean, it's just if you want to, if there's one adjective to describe American evangelicalism, I would say arrogant and narcissistic. Like there's just zero humility there, either culturally, racially, nationally, theologically. And I just found in talking with the Mennonite MKs, that I did, a few of them, that the whole tenor of the conversation, certainly how they experienced the culture in which they grew up, was really qualitatively different than what evangelicals did. But they were not a huge force in the missionary world that I grew up in. They had really receded from the scene. So there's some theological similarities. The sort of, Ari brings out this idea of calling sort of trumping everything else. And certainly the MK experience is a lot the same. The boarding school thing, the family separation, the strain of the family. I feel like anytime when you lay over human relationships, some other imperative, like some other completely absorbing, overarching imperative, like a religious imperative, it really is it so distorts human relationship. And the older I get, the more I see that even in sort of good, like more healthy religious families, I just think whenever you have another imperative other than just human relationship, it's so distortionary. And so you get that in Ari's film for sure. And you get certainly the grief of returning to the America and the desire to go back. There's a lot of things that Ari brings out in the film that is so universal to the MK experience, but there is some real theological and cultural differences between the Mennonites and the evangelicals.
Folks, we're going to leave it there. I've got to jump on a meeting in a minute and a half. Ari has a day to have. Holly, I don't know what.
I'm going to get dressed today. That's my goal today. I'm going to get dressed and do things.
We're going to be back tomorrow. We have special guests coming tomorrow. Alicia is returning. She is back from gallivanting in Italy and Slovenia and elsewhere. And we got a bunch. We may even have a Tiny Desk concert this week. We got a bunch of stuff happening. Look on Dogshirt Daily today if you want to see lots of cool videos about the Bandura. And I'm not even going to tell you what that is. You have to look at Dogshirt Daily.
I know what it is.
To find out what a Bandura is and how the Russians have endeavored to wipe it from the face of the earth. And yet, it is still with us. Folks, we're going to be back. Don't panic. See you tomorrow. Thank you, Ari.
Thank you, everyone. See you. Thanks for having me.